Imagine waking before the sun, not because you chose to, but because a bell, a whip, or the heavy footsteps of an overseer roused you from the shallowest of sleeps. You lie on a straw mattress, its stuffing crawling with insects, in a cabin that leaks in the rain and traps the stifling heat in summer. Around you, other bodies stir, family members, children, elders cramped together in a space that was never meant for dignity or comfort. This is not your home in the way you think of home. This is a slave cabin, built to remind you of your place, built to strip you of identity. And in just a few moments, you'll be expected to rise, to shuffle out, and to begin another day that may stretch 16 hours long. Life on a slave plantation in the 1800s was a system designed for one thing only: relentless labor. Tobacco, rice, sugar, and cotton fueled economies, but it was human beings, enslaved African men, women, and children who paid the price. For the average enslaved person, survival was not guaranteed. Disease, hunger, overwork, and punishment loomed constantly. And if you think you could last a single day in this brutal environment, history suggests you'd be broken by nightfall. From the moment the morning began, survival depended on obedience, or at least the appearance of it. Overseers patrolled with whips coiled at their sides, ready to lash anyone who moved too slowly, spoke out of turn, or faltered in the fields. The rhythm of the day was not yours to set. You didn't choose when to eat, when to drink, or even when to relieve yourself. Every second was accounted for, every movement scrutinized. Imagine working in fields under a blistering southern sun, your body drenched in sweat, mosquitoes and gnats clouding your vision, the soil beneath your bare feet scorching hot. There was no reprieve, no shade that you could seek without risk. The work itself was endless. Cotton picking tore at your fingers until they bled, the sharp burrs embedding splinters under your skin. Rice cultivation forced you to stand knee-deep in stagnant, mosquito-infested water, risking malaria with every breath. Sugar harvesting was so grueling, so lethal, that life expectancy on those plantations was often shockingly short. Tools were primitive: hoes, sickles, axes. The work wasn't measured in effort, but in output. If you didn't meet a quota, punishment awaited. Food was hardly sustenance. Rations were meager, often consisting of cornmeal, molasses, or the cheapest cuts of pork, if any at all. Vegetables were scarce, meat rarer still. Malnutrition was rampant, and diseases like pellagra and rickets were constant companions. To survive, enslaved people planted secret gardens when they could, or trapped small animals, anything to supplement their diet. But these acts of survival, if discovered, could lead to beatings or worse, and the punishments always looming were not abstract threats. Whipping was common, but so too were collars with spikes, shackles, even mutilation. The overseer's job was not only to extract labor, but to instill fear. Fear kept people in line. Fear made rebellion unthinkable. Yet despite this, resistance still simmered, slowing down in the fields, breaking tools, preserving culture and family ties in defiance of a system designed to erase them. For women, the burden was doubled. They worked the same long hours in the fields, but also bore the weight of domestic labor, cooking, cleaning, raising children under the constant threat that those children could be sold away at any moment. Enslaved women endured sexual violence at the hands of masters and overseers, their bodies treated as property, their pain ignored. Motherhood itself became both a source of strength and unbearable torment. Now picture this. You've labored from dawn until dusk, your body screaming for rest. But even when the day ends, true rest is a luxury denied. In the cabins, there's little space to stretch out. Privacy doesn't exist. Nighttime brings its own horrors: fear of patrols, of being caught if you dared to visit a loved one on another plantation, of punishments delivered under cover of darkness. And yet, within these conditions, enslaved people carved out moments of humanity. They sang spirituals that carried coded messages. They told stories that kept ancestral traditions alive. They prayed for deliverance, even as tomorrow promised the same chains. Could you endure the backbreaking labor, the constant hunger, the whip at your back, and the knowledge that you were treated not as human, but as property? The truth is, survival on a slave plantation was not about strength of body alone. It was about strength of spirit. Enslaved people clung to family, faith, and culture to preserve their humanity against a system that sought to crush it. And for most of us today, stripped of choice, freedom, and dignity, survival would not last a single day. This was not just history. It was a reality that shaped America for centuries, its scars still visible in society today. To remember this is not to dwell in darkness, but to confront the truth. Because understanding the brutality of the past is the only way to ensure it is never repeated. And before we move forward, take a moment. If you've made it this far, you know how important it is to keep these stories alive. So if you value history told without filters, subscribe to this channel, share this story, and help us continue to shine light on the truths that textbooks often leave in the shadows. The plantation was not just a place of work. It was an entire world built on domination. To step into that world as an enslaved person meant entering a system where every breath, every movement, every relationship was controlled. There was no such thing as a private life. From childhood to old age, your existence was mapped out for you, every path narrowing to one conclusion: servitude until your body gave out. Children were not spared. From the moment they could walk, they were trained into labor. Little hands carried water, gathered wood, chased livestock, or ran errands for overseers. Childhood, as we understand it today, did not exist. By the age of 12, a boy might be working in the fields from dawn to dusk, while a girl of the same age could be tending to the master's children inside the plantation house. And always, they grew up under the shadow of separation, because at any moment, without warning, they could be sold away. Families were torn apart at the auction block, children crying for mothers they would never see again. Husbands and wives split for profit. Imagine the trauma of never knowing if the person you loved would still be there tomorrow. Inside the plantation house, life was not gentler. Domestic enslaved workers might not face the sun-scorched fields, but their labor was equally relentless. Cooks, maids, nannies, and butlers lived at the beck and call of their masters, often working 18-hour days with no guarantee of rest. The punishment for a dropped plate, a poorly cooked meal, or a misplaced word could be just as brutal as anything faced in the fields. And behind closed doors, the violence could turn intimate. Enslaved women and girls, particularly those in domestic service, were subject to constant exploitation. Their bodies were seen as another form of property, one the master could use at will. The trauma of this abuse rippled through generations, a silent violence seldom spoken of in the records, but etched into memory. Religion played a complicated role in plantation life. On Sundays, enslaved people were sometimes allowed to gather, but even worship was tightly controlled. White preachers often delivered sermons that stressed obedience, twisting scripture to justify bondage. Yet within those same gatherings, enslaved people found ways to resist. Spirituals carried double meanings. Songs of heaven also served as veiled messages about escape, hope, and unity. To an overseer, it was music. To those who sang, it was survival. Health was fragile, always under siege. Poor diets, long hours, and unsanitary conditions bred disease. Dysentery, typhoid, smallpox, and tuberculosis spread quickly through crowded cabins. Medical care was nearly non-existent. When it did exist, it was often experimental, because enslaved people were not seen as patients, but as property. Doctors and masters subjected them to surgeries without anesthesia, tests without consent, procedures meant to benefit science or profit, not the enslaved themselves. Survival in such conditions depended as much on community care as anything else. Herbal knowledge, carried across generations from Africa, became lifelines. Midwives delivered babies, elders prepared remedies, neighbors shared what little they had. In the absence of mercy from the system, enslaved people created their own forms of care. But perhaps the greatest wound inflicted on plantation life was psychological. The system was built to break the human spirit. Whippings and shackles were not just punishments, they were spectacles. Overseers would drag someone to the center of the fields and lash them in front of others, turning pain into a lesson for all to see. Rebellion, if discovered, was met with savage reprisals. Those suspected of plotting escapes could be branded, mutilated, or killed outright. And yet, even in the face of this terror, the human spirit resisted. Songs, stories, whispers of freedom, they all kept alive the idea that slavery was not destiny, but a condition forced upon them. If you were dropped into this world, you would feel the crushing weight of powerlessness. You would wake each day to the knowledge that your life was not your own, that your labor enriched someone else, and that no matter how hard you worked, you would never reap the benefits. You would eat only enough to keep you alive, sleep only enough to rise again, and live every hour under the watchful eye of someone ready to remind you of your place. The fear would gnaw at you, the fear of punishment, the fear of separation, the fear of tomorrow. And that fear was not an accident. It was the system's foundation. Yet, to say enslaved people only suffered would erase the truth of their endurance. Within the cabins away from the eyes of overseers, there were moments of joy. A mother rocking her child to sleep, a father telling stories of ancestors and heroes, young people stealing time to laugh, to sing, to fall in love. These moments were radical acts of survival. They said, "You can own my body, but you cannot extinguish my humanity." That defiance, quiet, constant, was as much a part of plantation life as the labor itself. Now, step back and consider this. Could you endure the endless work, the constant hunger, the fear of punishment, and the loss of freedom? Most of us, shaped by lives of choice and comfort, would shatter under the strain. For the enslaved, survival was not just about enduring, but about preserving dignity in a system designed to erase it. Their strength was not in the chains they bore, but in the humanity they refused to surrender. And here is where your part comes in. If you believe these stories must never be forgotten, if you believe history should be told truthfully, subscribe to this channel. Share these words. Help ensure the resilience of those who endured is remembered, not as statistics, but as people whose lives still echo through the world we live in today. By now, you've felt the backbreaking labor, the suffocating heat, the hunger that never quite disappears. But what makes life on a slave plantation in the 1800s most unbearable is not only the physical toll, it's the constant reminder that you are property. Every sound, every sight, every interaction reinforces that fact. The plantation itself is structured as a machine, and you are its cogs, turning endlessly, replaceable when broken. At the center of this machine was the master, the so-called owner of land, crops, and people. His wealth was measured not only by acres or output, but by the number of lives he controlled. A successful master prided himself on discipline, efficiency, and profit. To him, an enslaved man or woman was not a father, mother, or child, but a tool to be sharpened or discarded. And yet, even masters feared something: rebellion. Behind every lash, every sail, every shackle was the unspoken terror that one day the enslaved would rise against them. This fear drove the cruelty deeper, making punishments harsher, surveillance stricter, and freedoms more restricted. Plantations ran on a fragile balance of domination and resistance. Enslaved people could not openly defy the system without risking their lives, but resistance took many forms. A tool deliberately broken, a field worked slower than expected, a whispered plan of escape passed in the dark. And then, there were the more daring axe rebellions, rare but powerful, that spread terror through the slaveholding class. From Nat Turner's revolt to countless smaller uprisings, the possibility of insurrection haunted every master's dream. To survive a plantation as an enslaved person meant not only enduring cruelty, but also navigating the razor's edge of when to comply and when to resist. The landscape itself was a prison. Patrols roamed the roads at night, hunting anyone who tried to run. Bloodhounds were trained to track the scent of human fear. Posters announcing rewards for runaways hung in towns, describing scars, heights, and skin tones, reducing people to property listings. And yet, many still ran. Some made it to free states, some to Canada. Some joined maroon communities, hidden deep in swamps and forests. Many more were captured, dragged back, and punished so severely that their bodies bore the scars forever. The choice to run was not just about freedom. It was about survival, about whether the slim hope of liberty outweighed the certainty of bondage. Even in moments of seeming quiet, the violence of the system was present. Auctions, for example, tore through communities like storms. Imagine standing on a block while strangers inspected your teeth, your muscles, your body, deciding your worth with coins and nods. Imagine watching your child sold to another master, your cries ignored, your arms empty. These scenes were not rare. They were the foundation of the slave economy, and they left wounds that never healed. As years wore on, bodies broke under the strain. Life expectancy for enslaved people was tragically short compared to their white counterparts. Accidents in the fields, untreated diseases, punishments gone too far, death was constant. And yet, even in the face of death, enslaved communities found ways to honor life. Funerals became sacred, moments of collective mourning and resistance, where songs, prayers, and rituals carried echoes of African traditions. In death, as in life, humanity refused to be extinguished. For those who survived long enough, old age brought no relief. An elderly enslaved man might no longer be able to keep pace in the fields, but that did not mean rest. He might be set to watch children or mend tools, his worth reduced, but his labor still demanded. Some masters saw older enslaved people as burdens and sold them off cheaply, separating them from families after decades of toil. Others treated them with token respect, pointing to their loyalty as a justification for the system itself. But for the enslaved themselves, old age was a reminder of years stolen, of lives lived in chains. So ask yourself again, could you survive this? The hunger, the lash, the loss, the endless labor, the psychological torment? Most of us, with our modern comforts and freedoms, could not. We would collapse within days, if not hours. And that is the haunting truth. Survival on a slave plantation was not about physical endurance alone. It was about a resilience of spirit so profound, it defies imagination. This resilience is why enslaved people are not remembered only as victims, but as survivors, as builders of culture, as voices that carried songs and stories through centuries of oppression. The food traditions, the music, the language all carry traces of that endurance. Their survival, against all odds, is why we can even tell these stories today. The question is not whether you could survive. The question is whether you would have the strength to endure while still holding on to hope, family, faith, and identity. Enslaved people did not choose these conditions, but within them, they chose to remain human. That is the greatest act of resistance. And so, as we close this chapter, remember, this history is not distant. Its legacies live in the present. To tell it truthfully is to honor those who lived it. If you believe these stories matter, if you believe history must be remembered in all its pain and power, subscribe to this channel. Share this story. And keep listening, because the past still speaks, and it demands that we never look away.